Just because a movie is awesome doesn't mean it's gonna do well at the box office. Sometimes the marketing fails a film, sometimes a movie is ahead of its time, and sometimes as an individual, we love a movie that everyone else thinks sucks. So here's several box office bombs which I love. Go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share some of your picks. What are some box office bombs which you absolutely love? When we say box office bombs, we're referring to movies that lost money for the studio. Generally speaking, for a movie to be profitable, it needs to make 2.5 to 3 times its budget in order to actually make money. That's because the budget only refers to the production budget. On top of that, they pay to market the movie, which is usually as much as the budget. And then the theaters take half of the gross revenue. Thus, a movie needs to make like 3 times its budget in order to actually become profitable. Those are the movies that didn't cross that threshold that we are looking at. And let's get started. First up, The Shashank Redemption. Now, this is a film that history has been incredibly kind to, where when the internet started talking about it, when IMDb and websites like that started to emerge, Shashank Redemption became this film that was highly praised as one of the greatest films ever made. But on its initial release, it was a box office bomb that nobody went to go see. Cost $25 million and initially only grossed $16 million. Now, once the buzz spread, they have done re-releases and other things like that. So since then, it's gone on to make more money. But in its initial release, audiences just didn't know what it was and they didn't go see it. And 1994 was a pretty incredible year for Best Picture nominees because you had Shawshank, Pulp Fiction, and then the winner was Forrest Gump. And the one of those that wasn't a big hit on initially was Shawshank Redemption. This is based off of a short story or novella from Stephen King and adapted into this great movie that is just very emotionally compelling. It has twists and turns that are very unexpected. It constantly toys with you as you think it's going in one direction and delivers something so much smarter and more emotionally resonant than you're expecting. It's about friendship. There's so much in there. It's so good. And we all missed it back in 1994. Killers of the Flower Moon. Now, this one came out just last year. It got fantastic reviews. It was nominated for a whole bunch of Oscars. Of course, it's a Martin Scorsese film. And so, superficially speaking, it looks like this movie was a big, gigantic success because you make a Martin Scorsese film, you get all the nominations you want, you gross $150 million globally. Seems like a big, gigantic win. Just one problem. The movie cost $200 million to make. It was one of these Apple TV projects, and Apple TV Plus is kind of their little pet project. They're making trillions over here selling technology. And so it's just like in their free time, they do movies and they're just throwing $200 million at top tier directors without concern for if the projects will make money or not. And in the case of Killers of the Flower Moon, they gave $200 million to Martin Scorsese. They let him cook, do his thing, way overspend on this movie. So he made a fantastic film that takes an interesting piece of history, explores it in a way that is just gut-wrenching. Like you feel sick to your stomach for the first 2 hours. And then the last hour, you're like, there's this satisfaction in the small amounts of justice that are delivered in the film. Incredible performances, gorgeous looking, but like a 3.5 hour long, very depressing film does not, generally speaking, gross $600 million. It's not the kind of movie like $150 million for a film like that. That's a pretty good box office haul, which is nowhere close to being profitable for a movie that cost $200 million. So, hey, thanks Apple for throwing money away. We got an awesome movie out of it, but also, according to definitions, it was absolutely a box office bomb. Starship Troopers. This movie came out when I was in high school, and while I didn't fully understand all of the satire and what Paul Verhoeven was doing with the film, I know that I thoroughly enjoyed it as an obnoxious high schooler, but cost a little bit over $100 million to make, and it only grossed $121 million. So on its initial release, box office wise, it was not a profitable film for the studio. But it was one of those movies that it felt like it took people a little while to get it, even though it's not like Paul Verhoeven's satire in this movie is remotely subtle. It's not as if his allusions to the Nazis were remotely subtle. All of it was on the nose, as per Paul Verhoeven, who has never been known for subtlety in anything that he has ever done. And it's a movie that, with time, its lore and its legend and its appeal has only grown, where it's had this massive revival this specific year because Helldivers came out, and essentially Helldivers is Starship Troopers with a little bit of Terminator thrown into the mix. And it's a movie that, just at face value, as a movie about Marines battling big gigantic bugs, it's a lot of fun. It has all of the gnarly violence you want from a Paul Verhoeven movie, but it also has all of his dark comedy and satire as well. There's a companion video to this over on Patreon with 10 more box office bombs that I love. Join at any level, as little as $2 per month, $21 per year. You gain access to that video, as well as hundreds of other exclusive videos and 2 exclusive weekly live streams. This video idea was actually pitched by my patrons and voted on, selected by them. At the bottom tier, you get access to all of the videos and the live streams. At $5 per month, you get your name on my end card, and you can pitch ideas for me to potentially make into a video. And at the top tier, you can do a monthly video chat with me, one-on-one. The information is down below in the description if you're interested in checking it out. Dread, the Carl Urban film from a little over 10 years ago, not the Stallone movie from about 30 years ago. This is an adaptation of the comic book character Judge Dredd. Cost $30 to $45 million to make. It only grossed $40 million, so definitely didn't make its way into the profitability category. And it's one of those movies where you're not quite sure if what the specific issue was. I mean, Judge Dredd has never been close to an A-list comic book character. Therefore, in a lot of people's minds, the Stallone movie from the 90s, for the mainstream, is their primary exposure to Judge Dredd. So the idea that they were doing another version of it, probably the previous version was the biggest hurdle to its success. But they made a really cool sci-fi action movie that is stylized, that has all this crazy use of slow-mo that ties into the plot with the drug that is being used by the main drug dealer lady in it. It's one of those examples of just through pure coincidence, this movie came out the same year as The Raid, and the two movies have the same plot. Both of them are awesome action movies, but in very different ways, while being kind of exactly the same. So great performance from Carl Urban, just a solid sci-fi action film that for whatever reason, people didn't go and see it when it first came out, and everyone fell in love with it as soon as they saw it when they could watch it at home. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Edgar Wright's highly stylized adaptation of the comics of the same name. And this movie is just so fun on so many levels. And Edgar Wright has always been a highly stylized director, but adapting a comic book into live action and bringing in all of these influences stylistically from video games and infusing it with all this music. This one oozes style out of every single pore. It's so fun. It's so energetic in the way that it uses visual onomatopoeia, the way that it uses scoring systems from video games. All of it is highly entertaining. It's funny. The action is choreographed to perfection. This movie is unlike any other film ever made, but it cost $60 to $85 million, and it only grossed $50 million. So it lost the studio a lot of money. It's one of those examples of a movie that it actually is very commercial and very mainstream, but it's difficult to put out a trailer that explains to people what it is, because it is so different on a conceptual level that average person just sees the trailer like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. When you watch the movie, you don't really know what you're looking at either, but you'll really enjoy it. This is Spinal Tap, the original rockumentary or mockumentary as it is from Rob Reiner inventing this fake rock band Spinal Tap, that it's another one that has become an absolute cult classic where the language of this movie has just soaked its way into popular culture, where people will just casually say this one goes up to 11. If you didn't know, that is a quote from This Is Spinal Tap.
These go to 11.
It's a whole joke bit sequence in this about amps going up to 11. So if you're at 10, you're all the way up and you want to go one more, you can go up to 11. That's just become part of the vernacular of the last 40 years. And it came from this movie that cost $2 million, but grossed less than $5 million across all of its releases. In which case you have a movie that its impact, its influence was so much greater than its initial box office run, where they shot another sequel to it 40 years later. They were shooting it in New Orleans when I was in New Orleans for the Overlook Film Festival. And some people actually just driving around town, the people I was at the festival saw some of them, the cast members on the shoot. And that's when you have a movie that, once again, sometimes for whatever reason, the marketing fails, the audience isn't ready for it. They don't understand who's Spinal Tap. I don't know who this is. I don't want to go documentary about a band I've never heard of. But with time, it's just one of these movies. It's so funny. It's so quotable. And it exceeded its initial run. The Flash. Okay, this is one of these movies. I know I'm on a wildly different page than most of you on this film. I will explain why very shortly. But the movie cost over $200 million to make. It made less than $300 million globally. You got to make 2.5 times your budget to be profitable. In the case of this movie, they spent a lot of money marketing it, so you definitely need to make $600+ million to actually be profitable, and it made less than $300 million. It was dead on arrival, and it never picked up any speed from the Speed Force. That was a joke, if you didn't catch my reference there. As for me, I've always enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed it when I first watched it. And I've gotten so much crap from people over liking the film. It's really quite simple. It's a movie about a person with incredible powers and abilities to save all these people. And he uses those great powers to bring back a dead family member, to save a family member. He has the power to change time, and he does that to bring back a dead family member. As someone who lost my dad when I was 20 years old, that is a motivation that is deeply emotionally resonant. And so this kind of journey to reconnect with someone that they lost, that works for me. And so when people are like, well, the CGI sucks. Okay, I'm not going to defend the CGI in the movie, but if you can't connect with the characters and the emotional arc of the film, then you don't really care about the VFX. That's the superficial stuff. If you don't connect with the emotional hook of the movie, all of a sudden all you're paying attention to is the fact that the VFX suck, which they do. But if you care about the arc at the center of it, that trumps everything. So when people are like, Shark, why do you like this movie? It's kind of offensive to me on a certain level because they're like, CGI sucks. Yeah, but they connect with me on a human level. That means a lot more to me than whether the Speed Force VFX look good or not. Dr. Sleep, another one of my controversial opinions. I prefer Dr. Sleep to The Shining by quite a bit, actually, and essentially for the same reason as I like The Flash. I just mentioned that my dad died when I was 20 years old. My dad died because he drank himself to death. And this is a movie about the struggle with alcohol and the ways that sons repeat the sins of their fathers. I myself, after my dad died, turned into an alcoholic and had to go to rehab. I started this YouTube channel while I was unemployed because of my drinking problem. So, a movie set in the world of The Shining that is tapping into that as Danny is struggling to not repeat the mistakes of his father, troubled by his past and overcoming trying to be a better version of himself. All of that is deeply profound to me and works on an emotional level. But even kind of beyond that, the nature of the story has a more overt villain, has kind of this idea of, different people have the shining power, and Danny helping this girl and stopping villains. It kind of has a superhero vibe to it. That's my thing, obviously. So once again, it's able to have that Stephen King lore touches on genres that I like a bit more, and then thematically on a character level, it's much more on my wavelength than The Shining. I've said many times, Kubrick, I fully respect him, but he's not really on my wavelength, whereas Flanagan is. And the movie cost $45 to $55 million. It only grossed $72 million, so nowhere close to the realm of profitability. And this is a movie that was heavily marketed, and so the marketing budget might even be a higher percentage than the production budget. Real quick, before I discuss the final three, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know, what are some of those box office bombs that you love? Also, remember there is a companion video to this over on Patreon with 10 more box office bombs that I love. Join at any level as little as $2 per month, $21 per year. You gain access to that video, as well as hundreds of other previous exclusive videos and live streams, and then 2 different weekly live streams that I do over there. Fight Club, the David Fincher film based off the Chuck Palahniuk book that cost a little over $60 million to make. And on its initial run, it only made $37 million in the United States. It did better internationally, and so then it made like $100 million globally. But when it first came out, it wasn't actually a profitable film. It's another one of these movies that, especially here in the United States, people discovered it on video. And it was like a movie tailor-made for people that were my age about these disenfranchised, college-age 20-somethings that we don't know what we're doing with our lives, and we have a lot of angst, and we're looking for some grander purpose, but we don't know what that is. And the movie just kind of taps into that in this way where so many of us kind of didn't fully understand the greater message of the film, but we even resonated with this basic idea of dudes connecting with each other over violence, and let's watch Fight Club and then do our own Fight Club in the backyard. And we kind of got like, we connected with that brotherhood side to it. And then as we thought about it more and started reading Chuck Palahniuk's book and all that, we started to discover, oh, this isn't a celebration of this. This is, it's pointing out a real problem, but it's also pointing out the very toxic solutions that we come up with and playing out the commentary on society to these extreme levels by the end of it. So one of these movies that, as we watched it more and more and more, we actually finally understood what it was going for. And that's where you have a movie that it's quite interesting, that you make people fans with the superficial aspects of it, that you can appeal to the people you're commenting on the base superficial level, the violence side to it. And then while you're exploring it, you get so much more out of it. The Suicide Squad. This is the James Gunn film that came out in 2021. Cost $185 million, and it only grossed $168 million globally, thus being very, very far from profitability. Now, this one is a little bit tricky to know exactly all the causes of this. It came out in 2021 as theaters were starting to open back up, but they weren't fully open everywhere. A lot of places still had a lot of restrictions. A lot of people were still hesitant to go back to the theaters. A few months after it came out, you of course had No Way Home really blow up at the box office and get people back going to the theaters. But this came out literally right as a very contagious strain of COVID was spreading. And so people pulled back again. They went reserved for about a month when this movie came out, and that clearly hurt its box office. Adding to that, it was a sequel to a movie that was actually quite profitable. David Ayer's Suicide Squad was a very profitable film, but also a movie that very few people actually liked. So they're doing a sequel to a movie that box office wise, they went, oh, people like this, let's make another one. But people did not like it. It did not connect with people. And even part of the reason people were drawn to the first one is it had Joker in it. Joker sells tickets. Joker is not in this movie. So when you combine Delta plus the previous movie, and maybe just people weren't interested, maybe the trailers didn't click, maybe it was too niche, and the movie probably did cost about $50 million too much, it wasn't profitable. It lost money. As for me, I thought that it was a very clever spin on both the Suicide Squad as well as the comic book movie genre, where instead of being another typical superhero film or copying the tone of the first film, it pulled from like 1960s and 70s war films, in particular The Dirty Dozen, and it because of that, had this fresh, different vibe to it. Of course, adding to that, you have James Gunn, who has such a distinct humor to his films, as well as being able to humanize and make very unrelatable characters relatable, where a guy that is a shark that barely talks suddenly, despite being a murderous killer, comes off like this very sweet puppy of a character, despite killing many people in very graphic and violent ways. And that's his gift, is that ability to humanize very extreme characters. But the final film on our list, of course, is Warrior. This is my go-to movie to recommend to people. And the reason it's my go-to movie is because so few people watched it when it first came out. It cost $25 million. It only made $23 million because no one was interested in going to go see an MMA movie 12, 13 years ago when this film came out. And then the word of mouth for the film has been fantastic since its release. The handful of people that did see it went, that's a really good sports movie. And they started telling people about it. And that's what I have tried to do. For me, I've said many times, this movie kind of out-Rockies Rocky. It does such a great job of setting up the personal stakes for each of our characters, the relational stakes for each of our characters in the first half of the movie, where you really care about the outcome of what happens to everyone. And then the whole last hour of the movie is just payoff after payoff after payoff. It's just a fantastic underdog story that is able to constantly make you, or just get you invested in every single fight, because it ties to the personal stakes of the character, and it ties to their character arc, the journey that they are on. And so it's not just cool fight choreography or fight stuff. It matters because it ties to that inner journey. Such a great film. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. But it didn't make money when it first came out because people like me, who currently love it, didn't go watch it at the time. So it was absolutely a box office bomb. But I adore this film and want everyone to go watch it. If you enjoyed this video, remember there's a companion video to it over on Patreon. You can learn more about that at the link down below in the description. Check out more of my videos right over here. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.